Hey, Anna.
Hey, Shay.
And hello, listeners.
Hello.
One of the questions we've gotten over the years at conferences and in online webinars or workshops is, hey, you guys are podcasters. How can I use podcasts in my classroom?
To which we respond, that's not something we've done.
Deer in the headlights.
Right. Because our focus is using our podcast as a tool for teacher development and reflection.
And we also had our friends Heather and Etche from English as a Singing Language on in episode 38 to talk about creating a student-facing podcast that learners can use for self-study.
Yep. But one area we haven't had a chance to explore is having students create podcasts themselves and just how useful a process that can be for reaching learning objectives.
Well, let's remedy that, shall we?
Let's.
Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Shay.
And I'm Anna.
And today we've got another Anna to introduce you to. One that you may remember from our recent Friends of the Podcast episode.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Anna Ayrapetyan, she or her. I'm from Armenia, and I've been teaching English for about 8 years at university settings. I teach at French University and Slavonic University in Armenia, and I'm very grateful to you for having me here. I think whatever you're doing is really cool because there are so many things to explore. There are so many ideas that teachers around the world can share with each other. And what you're doing is just amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, thank you. That's such a sweet thing for you to say. We're so excited to have you on today to talk about podcasting, be able to feature your expertise today, Anna. So thank you so much for being here. Before we even dive into the logistics behind creating podcasts with your students, we want to start with an icebreaker. We wanted to ask you, if you were to start your own podcast, what would it be about?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So besides teaching English, I'm also interested in psychology. I can say that is my hobby. Yeah, I've read a lot of books on psychology, and I think that it would be very interesting to kind of combine psychology and teaching, psychology of learning, psychology of students, how they feel, maybe something related to neuroscience, like what is going on in their brain, emotion and stuff like that. Yeah, but I would like to invite some cool specialists and ask a lot of questions to them about this and that. I think it would be very interesting for the audience as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so let's then dive into our topic for today, which is, you using podcasting in your teaching. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the background, what inspired you to start using podcasting in your language teaching?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for this question. So I think that all English teachers and English learners have the problem that the only place where students can practice speaking is the classroom, like especially in those countries where English is a foreign language. So my class lasts an hour and 20 minutes. And if I teach them, for example, twice or 3 times a week, and it's not enough. And I often tell my students that language learning requires a lot of devotion, a lot of work. And I tell them that about 70% of their work must be done at home. And only 30% of language learning happens in the classroom. I don't know whether it's right or not, but
it's a good estimate.
So that's it. So that's why we give them homework. We give them a lot of assignments for them to do it at home, and then in classroom they simply practice it. And so what I notice is that what we usually assign to our students is some reading, some vocabulary, doing some grammar exercises, maybe doing some listening. But we rarely ask our students to go home and speak English for 5 or 10 minutes. right? You will never say, guys, go home, speak English, and then how are you going to assess it? There is no way to check. Yeah. But when you give them, for example, an article, you say, read this article, answer the questions after the article, and then you come to the classroom and then you check, you understand whether they did it or not. In terms of speaking, that doesn't happen. And so I thought to myself, like, what can be done so that my students practice speaking at home as well? And I understood that podcasting would be the best way to do so.
Yeah.
And so we started this project, which lasted about one semester. Okay, there were some advantages, disadvantages, we'll talk about that. But as a way, as a tool to make your students speak the target language at home, outside the classroom, I think that's a great tool. So I recommend those teachers who really have that issue, who understand that their students struggle with speaking, podcasting can be one of the methods to tackle this issue.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you made. In settings where English is a foreign language, that's really essential to find outlets for students to practice their speaking outside of the classroom. That's a very common challenge. So
Anna made a really important point that while we can easily ask our learners to go home and practice speaking, we need some sort of evidence, right? There needs to be some sort of structure that we can use as a framework for assessment. So that's what's led her to choose podcasting as an at-home task.
Yeah. Anna's number one priority in this project was to get her students to speak more English outside of class, a challenge that many teachers struggle with. She also had a few other goals going into this, right?
Yes. Let's see what else she had in mind and hear about some happy accidents she had along the way.
Was to make my students do some research about the given topic. Because in the classroom, we discuss this or that, but it's never enough. But if you give them a specific topic to work on, they go home, they find some information, do some research, read about this and that, and so they enrich their knowledge. And my students told me that they enrich their vocabulary incredibly, because while reading the information, finding the information, they encountered a lot of unknown words and they really wanted to use them in their podcast. And so they used them. Well, it wasn't my objective, but I think that can be an objective for other teachers who would like to do podcasting with their students.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? This idea of students looking at vocabulary just through reading. If they're not forced to actually use the vocabulary, they're just flexing, those receptive language skills rather than the production side of things. So that's really great. And I love that you mentioned that you didn't go in there with so many objectives, right? Because it was the first time you were doing this, you weren't, trying to overwhelm yourself or your students with what you were setting out to accomplish. You had this really specific goal and parameters. That's really wise.
Anna talked about how she had created a rubric that she introduced to students at the start of the semester, and that it primarily focused on content, elements of language like pronunciation and grammar, and some technical aspects as well.
Yeah. What I love most about this project is how customizable it is. Like, maybe you're working with learners who have a real need to expand their vocabulary on a specific topic. That could be a point you emphasize more heavily in the evaluative framework.
Absolutely, yeah. You can make this fit the needs of your course objectives. And of course, like any other new learning initiative, sharing expectations with students in advance can help to give focus to the assignment and ensure everyone is on the same page about what they're setting out to accomplish.
Absolutely. Well, so tell us a little bit more about the focus for the podcast. What kinds of podcasts and what topics have you had the students go out and research and create?
So since I have my curriculum, my textbook, I couldn't deviate from that. So we were having our English classes with our textbook, with our units. So, for example, in our textbook, we read about different styles of architecture, about different churches, different buildings, modern architecture, something. Then we did some exercises related to that unit. We did some listening, speaking, vocabulary, grammar. And then I said, okay, guys, so we read a couple of examples. Yeah, for example, Sagrada de Familia, Acropolis, etc., etc. So then you go and think for yourself what you would like to talk about related to architecture. Maybe you would like to present another building that you find remarkable, amazing. For example, in Armenia, we have many ancient churches. Yeah. And I also ask them to try to use the vocabulary that we learned in that unit and grammar. But it was like I wasn't imposing that on them. I gave them more freedom, flexibility. Yeah, and so they went home. They found some information. So I remember a couple of students had their podcasting about church in Ejmiadzin. You probably know that there are 5 churches there, and they're ancient. They were built many centuries ago. So they found the information related to that. They worked with that information. Yeah, but I was not interfering in that process. And then they together found time, or online. They were recording that podcasting and posting it on that platform. And then I checked and assessed it.
There's so much good I want to call attention to here, but before we debrief Anna, we have a snippet from a few of Anna's students to share.
Yes, let's learn about Armenian architecture, listeners.
The inhabitants of the 19th century Gyumri, then known as Alexandropol, saw their city as the historical successor to Ani. The building in Gyumri that most clearly reveals that aspiration is the church known as Surp Amenapelkic. Begun in the year 1858 and finished in 1873, this church design was a deliberate recreation of the Cathedral of Ani. Its architect was the master mason Tadeusz Andikyan. Contemporary accounts tell that Andikyan would often take a coach in the evening and go to Ani, where at the dawn the following morning he would measure and record on paper some part of the cathedral. He would then return.
Lovely, just lovely. This brought me back to my time in Armenia, Shay.
I bet. I hope I get to visit one day. But for now, I'll have to visit by way of Anna's students' podcasts.
Yes, what a fantastic project and outcomes. Anna mentioned that her students worked in pairs, each taking on the role of interviewer and interviewee to prompt one another to share on specific ideas related to their selected topic.
Right. So in the example we shared, students might have said, "Tell me about this church. When was it built? By whom?" etc. Students supported each other in the research and preparation stage, which made the process more conversational rather than sounding too practiced or presentation-like.
Yep. I can see how this could work as a solo project too, but I like the collaborative element that Anna included. A lot of thought went into this.
Right. She didn't just choose a random topic that she fancied. She chose a natural entry point within a prescribed curriculum and expanded the topic in a unique way.
I also really appreciate that Anna was pretty hands-off during the actual process. She ensured students had everything they needed at the start, including information about expectations and evaluation. And then she said she didn't interfere.
And it can be challenging to be hands-off, right?
Yeah.
This makes me think of the principles of hover-free teaching and our conversation with Miriam Platinsky, author of Teach More, Hover Less. Remember?
Yeah, episode 42 if you're interested, listeners.
Yeah, we talked at length about how with project-based learning and having students create a podcast is a great example of PBL. With project-based learning, you can craft a learning experience in which students have a lot of autonomy me, so long as you put the time in up front.
And even if you put in time to create a framework for students to operate, you'll likely want to make some changes in the next iteration.
Anna mentioned wishing she had proofed her students' scripts, offering a bit of assistance with editing for grammar and facilitating a more streamlined and linguistically accurate final product.
I can appreciate that, but everything has a learning curve, and considering that her primary goal was to get students speaking about and researching a new topic, perfect language wasn't totally necessary.
Right. There was just so much happening in this process, a lot of learning happening on all fronts, not least of which the tech side of things, right?
Yeah, we asked Anna to give us more information about how her students actually created the podcasts. Let's get techie.
By the end of the project, each student had like 4 podcasts with their topic. They used Audacity for editing their podcast, changing something. And for recording, I think they just recorded it on their smartphones. And then we were posting it on Buzzsprout. That was the platform. It was convenient, and like students felt comfortable while using Buzzsprout, so it didn't require any special knowledge or some special skills. They were posting it and they were listening to their peers, and I listened to all their podcasts and assessed them.
I appreciate that Anna emphasizes how she simplified the process for her students. This isn't a project that required a lot of tech tools or knowledge to be successful.
Right. So students often use their phones to record the episodes, a very accessible choice, I think, and then they edit it on Audacity.
We use Audacity to edit episodes too. The interface seems a little dated, but it is relatively user-friendly and free. There's also GarageBand, which is similar and also free.
And then for a podcast hosting platform, she chose Buzzsprout. One thing to note, listeners, if you're thinking about using Buzzsprout to host and share your students' episodes, is that the free version only allows you to have your episodes there for 90 days. You'd have to upgrade your subscription if you want to have the episodes live there forever.
Right. Anna shared that this was no problem for her as she was treating this as a pilot. But if you're looking to make this an ongoing project, it might be worth looking into other options. We use Spotify for podcasters, formerly known as Anchor, until it was acquired.
So with all of this in mind, we were curious how it went for Anna's students. What was their previous experience with podcasts? What were some of the challenges they faced? What feedback they had for her?
Previously, I asked them and they said that yes, they had been listening to different podcasts, but they just did it for fun, for themselves. But they never created their own podcast, so it was something absolutely new for them. And we just decided to do it as an experiment. After each podcast, I gave them a survey to complete about the process, like how long it lasts, like creating one podcast, what challenges they had, whether they liked it or not, whether they liked their final product or not. And so my research showed that in the beginning, they spent about 2-3 hours on creating one podcast, which was long because, it was for the first time. They weren't very well familiar with the technology, different tools, etc. So it took them quite long. And then by the end of the project, it took them 1 hour.
Wow.
Maximum.
Great gains, great outcomes.
But, I didn't assign very long podcasts. It was maximum like 5-6 minutes, not more. The skill of using technology also improved because they learned many tools. But again, I didn't have it as an objective. They were linguists. They studied linguistics, so they're not IT people or something. But they improved those skills as well.
Yeah. And that's equally as important, that kind of like tech literacy that you're bringing to them. Great. Yeah.
Sometimes they complained, of course. In the beginning, I remember everybody said that they hated their voices. They couldn't just hear. And when I wanted to play their podcast in the classroom, they were panicking.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But they got used to that, I think. And in my survey, I had a question how satisfied they were with their results. So I remember in the beginning, most of them said they weren't satisfied at all. Everything was bad. They hated their voice, etc., etc. But by the end of the project, so when they had their fourth podcast, they said that, yeah, it was good. We felt very proud of ourselves. Yeah, everything was good.
Yeah.
So it takes time, like to get used to it. So like personally, I also hate my voice when I hear it.
Get used to it.
But I think the more I hear, yes, I should get used to that. Yeah.
Well, we have to convince learners that podcasting can be a tool for betterment. Yeah.
As I said, in the beginning, they hated it. At the end, they started liking it. But I also, in my survey, I had a question on whether it should be used in teaching, in the classroom, whether teachers should use it. They said they should, but not very often.
It's a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah, just for fun, just for the sake of change, maybe like once or twice a semester, but not more.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, just also because, if I've had experience doing more project-based learning in the classroom, in your teaching context, you have an hour and a half and it's very exam based, and you might not have as much space for, ongoing assessment as in a English language classroom in the United States, where you have them 3 hours twice a week or whatever it is. I can understand why students would be like, yeah, let's do this just once in the Armenian context, because the structure might not make space for it. But I love that you're still, finding a way to integrate that into the curriculum, even though students might not be used to having a lot of outside work that takes 3 hours to create one podcast, right? So I love that you're able to get them to that place, even though you have that 1 hour and a half with them.
Anna, you brought up the importance of considering context when implementing something like this. The other Anna realized that she was working with, in this case, a fixed curriculum, and she got creative.
Yeah, and I think this can serve as a point of inspiration for other teachers operating within a similar context. Let's hear some tips from Anna to round out this conversation.
Anna, what advice would you give to teachers who are thinking of starting a podcast with their classes, and what are some of the challenges that they might expect to face in the process?
Yeah, so if teachers have the problems that I have, so to encourage students to speak more, to be more confident, to develop skills of researchers, because they had to find the information, they had to find reliable information. You can provide them with resources which you think are reliable. So in my case, I gave them more freedom, more flexibility, but you can give yours. Yeah, I would recommend you ask your students to first write the script, like transcript of their speech, then proofread it, change it, make it a little bit more eloquent, maybe adding some cool words, new words like C1, C2 level words, to sound more academic. And then I would recommend you ask them working in pairs, because it's a great thing. So they work together, they interact together. So be ready to hear their concerns, their complaints about this and that, the process. But I would also recommend to post their podcasting in the platforms where their podcast can be available to a big audience, so that other people can hear their podcast, maybe share them on different platforms through different social media why it is done, because when students know that they're going to be listened to, their podcasting is going to be listened to by somebody, they will put more effort into doing that. They would make sure that they sound accurate, they don't make any significant mistakes, that whatever they're talking about makes sense. But of course, everything requires a lot of time. Unfortunately, I didn't have that much time. So if you really want to do it, ideally, if you combine it with other classes, if students combine it with other classes, I think it should take 1 month for one podcast, if you really want to have quality product. As I said, I'm mainly focused on their speech and on their content, but of course it is important to pay attention to the quality of the podcast. I ask them to record their podcast in small room. Ideally, it would be perfect to enter your wardrobe.
A lot of professional podcasters do that.
So I didn't insist on them having some professional technology for recording that, but of course having a good microphone, so as you are using right now, good microphone. So of course this matters if you really want to focus on quality. And you can make it a great project. I think, although my students complained, but in the end, they felt very proud of the work that they have done. I think this is also very important to develop the sense of pride in your students. So it's definitely worth
absolutely
trying, we're doing, and practicing.
Thank you. You've convinced us.
I mean, I feel inspired. I mean, this is something that I haven't done with students before. I have to think about how I'm going to do this in my teaching. It's kind of crazy now that I am a podcaster and I know how all of this stuff works. It feels much more accessible, whereas I think a lot of teachers just feel like that's really a big take on, and there's so much I don't know. But Anna, I think that you've given us a lot of sort of easy entry points, and you've shared with teachers, you don't need to have all the skills yourself. You just really need 2 platforms, a mic and Audacity and the know-how. And
I just decided to keep it simple, just not to overwhelm them. They are university students, and their life is a bit stressful. It was quite difficult, but they did it, and I was so thankful to them for doing that. We all together, the whole classroom, and I felt that we did something great. That was our baby, and it kind of united us. It wasn't just you enter the classroom, you teach your class, and you leave, you say goodbye, and that's it. No, it was a common project. It gives a sense of unity.
I love how Anna kept coming back to consider the needs of her learners. She's such a compassionate teacher. I really respect her dedication to her craft and to podcasting for project-based learning.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Anna, for being with us. And you too, listeners. As always, we want to hear from you. Have you ever had students create podcasts to reach a learning objective? How have you integrated student-led podcasting into your teaching context?
You can share with us in a comment on social media or email us at teacherthinkaloud@gmail.com. We welcome your questions, reflections, and ideas.
And don't forget to like this episode, comment, or subscribe. We want you to be a part of our community of practice. As always, friends, thanks for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. And until next time, happy teaching.
And happy reflecting.